Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christopher Logan, and I lead the freight and logistics practice for growth markets at Accenture. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our panel of experts. First, we have Tan Chenhui, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Asia Pacific for Trafigura. In addition to his corporate role, Chenhui is the co-chair of the Supply Chain Task Force within the Emerging Stronger Task Force set up by the Prime Minister of Singapore. He has more than 25 years of experience of management, leadership, and financial roles. And prior to joining Trafigura, he was the founder of the Asia business for Apollo Global Management. I'd like to introduce Dorji Sun. He is the co-founder of Perlin, and he's an advisor and investor in blockchain projects, including many more. I'm just going to name a few of them around Republic Protocol, Devery, Power Ledger, Loki Network, Quadrant, Airblock. I think I've missed a couple, Dorji. You can add to that. He's a big expert in this field. Third, I'd like to introduce Orapong Tien Nguyen. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Digital Venture, or DV. DV is a fintech startup spinning off from the Siam Commercial Bank in Thailand. And he's responsible for disruptive financial solutions and to position DV as a fintech leader in the global market. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce John Garden, who's the Vice President of Freight and Logistics of Enterprise Partnerships at MasterCard. John drives market engagement and he grows partnerships within the freight and logistics industry. He develops initiatives to support digital transformation through collaboration with technology partners, fintechs, and what we call freight techs in the supply chain space, and working with MasterCard's global network of banks. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us today, and let's get started. So as a quick overview, this panel is going to look at different use cases and different business models of distributed ledger technologies and of digital applications within the trade and supply chain space. Panelists will share their experiences developing and delivering, more importantly, delivering new business models, explaining the benefits to industries and different participants, and hopefully provide some great insights for all of you on opportunities within the global trade ecosystem. As you all know, over the past decades, there have been some big advancements in technology and digital transformation in supply chain, and that has enabled trade to grow throughout the world. That's the good news. Some of the challenges are that many of the small still rely on in-house ERP systems or in-house technologies that do not communicate well with each other. And when transactions occur between these different systems and parties outside the system, it creates friction and introduces transaction costs and reduces quality. And for these reasons, businesses, large and small, are seeking ways to tackle the challenges. Distributed ledger technology, or what lots of people call blockchain for short, has been seen as both a disruptor in this space, but also a solution to a lot of these problems, particularly for these very complex business transactions in supply chains and global trade. So going forward, these are the areas that we think will provide big solutions for the challenges that companies who are trading in the global space. One example that I'll give from Accenture before I turn it over to the panelists is Accenture's been working with Nippon Express, a very large logistics company based in Japan, for a blockchain-based pharmaceutical logistics solution to reduce the friction that we talked about and also improve visibility throughout the supply chain. It's planning to be launched in 2021, and it will use sensor IoT devices to manage the tracking and tracing, ensuring temperature control is monitored all the way through, and that there's full visibility for all participants in the supply chain. And as we all know, pharmaceuticals in general are under a tremendous amount of scrutiny, but I think we'll all agree that this is going to become even more important as a certain COVID-19 vaccine will be distributed through all major countries, hopefully very, very early next year. So that's just one quick example, but I am now going to engage the panelists because that's who you're here to see. And first, let me start off with all four of the panelists. And I would like each of you to share your thoughts specifically around some of the new business models that are being used to create benefits in this industry. And please share your own business model and how that creates value for participants. So I'd like to start with Xin-Hui, and then move on to Orapong, and then Dorji, and then finally over to John. So Xin-Hui, could you share with us a few thoughts?
For my sector, it has been quite disrupted, right? So I just, because supply chain is such a big team, right? We all are touching different parts of the elephant, right? Some will touch the feet, some will touch the nose, right? So it's quite a difficult panel, but I just want to add value, so I'll be more specific. Talking about also my work on the supply chain digitization program for the Emerging Stronger Task Force. I think for my sector, which is the maritime and the commodity sector, I think it has one of the biggest disruption. It is not just the COVID-19, or it's also the trade war. It's also negative oil price in March, April, and more importantly, it's also frauds. Right, so the ecosystem has got together to try to solve all these problems at one go. So things have changed a lot, including on trade finance, and how much time do we have as a system? I think is now the question. Right, so the old way of doing things, land based on letter of credit in the traditional trade finance that dated back into the 17th century, when the Dutch were here for the Dutch East Indies. I think things are beginning to change, right, in the right time with digitization. So hopefully 2021, with a number of changes, including legislation, I think the whole ecosystem can move forward and to allow authentication of bill of lading and trade registry, etc. So I just leave it here and let the other three panelists who are the real experts to talk more. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a great introduction. Thank you, Xin-Hui. Orapong?
Thank you, Chris. The business model for digital ventures is to work with banks. The problem that we are tackling is how to improve efficiency in the supply chain from the point that a buyer issues a purchase order until the goods got delivered and paid. Right? This typically is a long lead time process with a lot of documents that need to be verified and approved. And if you look at all these documents, they're actually ledgers. That's why we chose to use distributed ledger technology or blockchain as the fundamental technology to build our platform. So what we have done is we create a platform called B2P, which stands for blockchain for procure to pay. This is to automate the information and financial flows related to trades. And the platform went live since August 2018. What we have observed in this 2+ years of services is that we are able to drive saving productivity gain from the buyer side at the rate about 1.3 to $2 per invoice. We are able to reduce fraud because by able to link all these ledgers together, we are able to check for discrepancy at the very detailed level, and we are able to provide lower cost liquidity to the suppliers based on our platform's ability to verify trades and control payment. So far, we have more than, as of yesterday, I had 9,600 companies onboarded, and the projected volume next year, we expect to see about $3 billion flowing through our platform. So I'm in the phase of expanding overseas, partnering with more banks, and once I have more bank partners in more countries, I will start developing cross-border trade and disrupting import and export, which is a lot more complex than the domestic trade solution that I have today.
That's great, and those are some pretty impressive numbers in terms of companies that have been onboarding. We'll come back to that issue later on in the discussion. So thank you. Dorji, can I hear some thoughts from you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some experiences. Orapong, email me after this panel. You might have a new customer. So just as background and full disclosure, actually, Perlian has 3 areas of business. The first area is we work very closely with the International Chamber of Commerce. This is the peak 100-year-old NGO body for trade. It has 45 SMEs and all of the chambers of commerce globally under its auspices. And what we're doing is we're helping them build decentralized ledgers, smart contracts, looking at how the future of trade potentially can be hopefully interoperable. And this is, as exactly like Chin Hui said, you know, one of the challenges in the paper world is you literally have 10,000 emails a month just following some of the trades that his extensive trading team does. And I can talk a little bit about an example of where we worked with Trafigura to shift a $20 million iron ore shipment from South Africa to China through Singapore with DBS on the blockchain. And that was provided by IMDA, the Singapore government agency, and they had built Trade Trust. So that's just an example of how the work we do with international trade and the ICC can be put onto the blockchain, thereby reducing duplication, double spend attacks, and some of the issues that Chin Hui touched upon, which we'll dig into later. The second area of the work that we do is a deep passion of mine. So for 13 years, I've been investing and trading in carbon. I've been in climate change issues, and I'm formerly one of Time Magazine's heroes of the environment. And the beauty of what tokenizing of carbon it can do is it can help with the big global issues where sovereign states are having issues around finding transparency and trust. And so when Pavilion announced that they wanted a carbon neutral LNG solution, what you can actually do is you could have carbon tokens attached to a smart contract for LNG. In the future, you could settle at the same time, you know, digitally on a DLT or a blockchain, you know, with the actual carbon abatement on hopefully a global register based out of Singapore to ensure that the carbon hasn't been double counted, to ensure that the carbon is attached and simultaneously settled. So the other area we're doing is supply chain traceability. So the example you gave with Nippon Express, fantastic. And actually one of the projects that we're doing with the ICC, we have now signed up a total of about 175 airports, and Etihad Airlines has run a pilot. But essentially, it's a blockchain signature to show that you've had a COVID test and you're negative, or you've had a COVID vaccine. So we could actually talk about integrating with Accenture's Nippon Express example. So we've signed with Sanofi. Sanofi uses your platform to trace that the actual vaccine is real, and then it's delivered, and that the person now has a QR code on their phone saying that they've actually had an authentic vaccine. Because as you saw, Xi Jinping, China, announced that they wanted to support a QR code for COVID status, but it's unlikely in today's trade war, as Chin Hui said, that the US would trust a Chinese-built app, but at the same time, would China trust a Google-based app? Unlikely, but the Ethereum blockchain is something that could actually interoperate. So again, what essentially blockchains do is bring distributed trust. And that's why a player like Singapore can be a world shaper by helping create interoperability and standards, as it's doing with examples like Trade Trust. The third and final area that we add value is called DeFi. So decentralized finance is starting to grow. And that's where, in the example of trade finance, there are a pool of investors that are not banks, they're not family offices, they're not traders, but they're all interested in being able to support trade if they can have basically a title document, e.g. Some form of bill of lading on the blockchain. And so that's where you can have different forms of finance. And that's one of the areas that Orapong and Chinhui will be talking about. But they're the three main areas that Perlian is trying to create value and integrate into the emerging blockchain world.
Those are great, Dorji. Thanks very much. I mean, three very concrete opportunities, and you even had a chance to sneak in a few future potential opportunities in there as well. So that's super valuable. And John, let me turn it over to you. John, I think you're on mute.
My apologies. Thank you. Thanks, Christopher, and thanks again for the invitation to participate. Good morning, everybody. So our focus from a MasterCard perspective, as you probably imagine from a supply freight logistics perspective, is around payment digitization and integrating payment digitization with broader digital transformations within the industry. We have our own blockchain investments and initiatives which we've been deploying for some time now around traceability and visibility. So we've got a number of partnerships and projects that are ongoing that are specifically focused around the area of data orchestration within freight logistics. And I think, Christopher, as you mentioned, there's lots of scope within the industry given the fragmentation and complexity that exists, and so we've partnered with a few companies, and just to give some, I guess, some clear examples of practical applications of delivering value. So a good example, which is in the public domain, is a deployment with Walmart in Canada, who have been working with one of our partners to basically address some of the friction and basically issues that exist within their freight processing environment, how they interact with particularly the road hauliers in the industry that are servicing their account. And it's not specific to road haulage within the industry. There is a chronic issue around billing disputes, inaccuracy, and revenue leakage that are associated with some of these issues. But that deployment with Walmart, I think it's safe to say, has been transformational in terms of the value that it's delivered both for Walmart and for the carriers, and leveraging blockchain as part of the solution. And it's brought in a tremendous amount of trust and transparency that didn't exist before, where previously most of their suppliers were living in a situation where payments were late, were inaccurate, and where it was taking a lot of resource to resolve. And these issues have by and large been addressed by the deployment that's taken place there, and it's totally transformed that customer supplier relationship and allow them to focus on the important stuff and not on the friction that's created by that billing, that inaccuracy and the disputes that ensue. So it's a very practical application, but it's just an example of some of the areas where we're focusing on to try and create more trust, remove friction, and ultimately provide enhanced automation within the supply chain.
That's great, John. And being Canadian myself, I really appreciate you pulling a Canada example in our FinTech festival here. But seriously, I know you picked that example because it's one in the public domain, but I know that you've got many other ones that are not in the public domain that are equally innovative. So you've got a lot going on there. Appreciate you sharing with the audience. So with that, let's move into I guess what I would think of as the elephant in the room, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. And we all know that the pandemic has changed business all over the world. And it's highlighted the importance of the ability of companies to react and change their supply chains on a moment's notice. Now, from my personal perspective, I've been in logistics my entire career. And as I look back on the last year, I look at my former colleagues and brothers and sisters in the logistics space, and I realize we're not the first responders, we're not the healthcare workers on the very front line. However, the people in supply chain and the people in logistics have been working heroically since almost the beginning of 2020, since China locked down on January 23rd. The global supply chain community have been working heroically to keep goods flowing over tremendous challenges, which we're all aware of, to keep food and other supplies on the shelves for all of us, to get goods delivered to our doors, since many of us have been locked down for significant portions of time, and have really kept the global economy from completely falling over. And so as I think about the supply chain and the people who are in it, as I said, I think they've been very heroic this year. And so with that, I'd like to ask a question to Orapong and to Chin-Hui. Either how has the trade and logistics supply chain business changed in the last 9 months as a result of COVID, or if you'd rather, you could take a look at what's your outlook, be more on the optimistic side. What's the outlook post-COVID for global supply chains? Where do you see the world going? So Orapong, maybe your thoughts to start?
Thank you, Chris. I think my perspective is more of a domestic trade in Thailand from what I have observed from the data on my platform. So at the beginning of COVID until now, what we have observed, there are 3 phases. Right? The first phase was almost a complete shutdown, which lasted about 3 months. Right? We saw significant drops in purchase order that got processed through our platform, right? Especially in the segments related to travel, food, and beverage, which is a big part of Thailand's economy. And then in the second phase, we saw selective recovery. What selective means is that there's some parts that, especially people related to food delivery, right? Not just restaurant, right? But people who provide packaging, plastic packaging, paper packaging. We saw tremendous growth from observing the data flowing through our platform in those areas. Now, I think we're in the phase of the unknown, right? We're all hoping for vaccine to come soon, right? But we don't know how long it will become widely available. But what we have seen now is like a split. I think in the Wall Street, they call it a K-shaped recovery. Right? The segment that related to working at home, to food delivery, to digital trades, they're going up rapidly. The segment related to traditional business like travel, hotel, restaurant, traditional restaurant, they still keep on going down. And that's also shown in the data on the need for liquidity. Before COVID, we got the application for invoice financing through our platform at the rate of about 1.5% of the payment that we process. But now we are observing in many industries that rate has gone up higher than 10%, which means that the suppliers have higher need for liquidity. And if you couple that with the fact that banks right now is slowing down lending to suppliers because the risk associated with the economy, and that makes us see that there's value for having a platform like what we have here, right? Because we want the platform, we know whether the trades are real or not, right? 2, we control the payment. Just by the fact that we know that the trades are real and we control the payment, as long as the buyer pay the supplier, we collect the lending. That's why we're able to provide lending to suppliers, even in the toughest time that we're observing today.
Right, that's a great point, and just where you ended is a wonderful example of why the technology is so important, is the ability to continue to provide lending and financing in even the most difficult circumstances. So that's a great point. Chin-Hui, maybe your thoughts on...
So if I may add on to what has been said previously, I think while we implement changes, technical changes, and talk about technological improvement, we also need to be careful and mindful that what are the real pain points or actual problem we are solving. Right? Just because we have a good and new technology, sometimes it's more about timing. Right. I was just chatting with a number of CIO today in the task force workshop. Right. The only day when a company say they are serious about digitization is when you have the CIO or CTO sits on the board or sits on the committee. Then you know that that company is serious. Or else it will just be talk. Right? Because everybody just talk about digitization, the acceleration of digitization with this virus, but just talk only until the CIO, CTO will be in position of influence. But many of the CTO and CIO still talk about technology as though it's the only thing. No, you have to solve a real problem, right? Then it is valid. Why I have to say this is the framing, right? We know that many of the technology has been around for a while. So what changes here in this time frame that allow us to execute some of these things that we talk about, I think will be more critical, is the adoption, right? How fast can we adopt? I think it will be more intra-Asia. It's not that UK or the US is not important. It's just that every day the Western world, some part of the Western world focus on the coronavirus. Every day a country like Singapore or Thailand or China gets stronger, relatively speaking, because we are talking about things that matters. So with the signing of RCEP, right, and this is our century, right, Asia century, with now 60% of the population and more, and now forming the bulk of the economic bloc to get this right, to get the digitization right. My central bank governor, Ravi Menon, has mentioned recently that he hopes to see a full digitization of trade documentation in ASEAN and in China. That will be a leapfrog, right, of some of these frauds that we talk about that has prevented the banks from lending. The non-banks will want to take this pie sooner or later, but at this moment, the ecosystem has to work towards a wider adoption. And the adoption cannot just be technical, right? It has to be operational issues that to be resolved. Many countries are not ready. Singapore, I think, is ready. There is enough pinpoint urgency to get together as a system, right, between the country and between the ecosystem. I think that will be key. But we also cannot rush it because the technology is available. Right? The human element cannot be underestimated. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chin Hui. And I just want to reemphasize a point you alluded to in there. When you think about Singapore, it's amazing how forward-looking Singapore is on these issues, and particularly the Emerging Stronger Task Force that you're a co-chair on, the supply chain stream on that was announced. I remember basically right in the teeth of the COVID crisis in Singapore, right when it was at its worst, and the objective wasn't how to solve the COVID crisis. It was how to make sure that Singapore is much stronger in the future, and the government and private sector were already thinking far ahead, even in the middle of a crisis, which was very different from most countries around the world. So kudos for that to the country, to my host country here. So thank you, Chin Hui. So. And you also talked about networks and complexity, and that leads into our next question around, if you think about supply chains as the arteries of the global ecosystem, and they empower international trade flows, global commerce, but they come with these enormous ecosystems, from suppliers, procurement, logistics, trade finance, many things that people have mentioned, and this is all over the world. So let's unpack some of these things in terms of how can blockchain technology help and new business models help manage this complexity. And are there different ways of thinking about this, whether you think about it at the global network whether you think about it at the regional network or whether you think about it at a more local domestic market. So let me turn it over to Dorji for some thoughts on that.
Thanks, Chris, for the easy question. I mean, I thought it was happy hour now, and that was probably one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked. But look, what I thought as you were reading that question, I was thinking, so let's try and use an example. So just picking up where Chinhui and Orapong were talking about, many people have talked about the trade finance collapse. So basically, banks are starting to pull out of trade finance because, you know, it's an operationally heavy type of trade with paper documentation, and because they're no longer able to even sit in their offices to process some of the bill of ladings, letters of credit, et cetera, et cetera. So some estimates are 3.4 trillion Standard Chartered Bank, up to 5 trillion in shortfall from ICC. So how can we improve this using something like, you know, blockchains, DLT? So the big thing that we have to watch, everyone watching this should watch the digital yuan. Just watch how China has taken the 5 years to build the plumbing that they now can do. And this is also now starting to be mirrored by other countries, South Korea, Malaysia, digital currency, central bank digital currency. So this is not Bitcoin, but it's using a blockchain to suddenly start settling a real fiat currency on the blockchain, which now means that it can sit on a smart contract. So what does that mean? That means that if I'm a small trader, and let's just say in the past I'd have to wait 90 days and there'd be a lot of costs and it's paper and I'd have to go hand in hand to a bank, and now the bank is withholding some of that trade finance. If central bank digital currency can sit on a blockchain that says my digital bill of lading, my title document sits there, and then let's just say an IoT built by Accenture and digital identity built by MasterCard and a digital wallet built by MasterCard all sits together, then an Incoterm developed in 1937, you know, COB, you know, freight on board, FOB, whatever, CIF, you know, any of these types of Incoterm smart contracts can then self-execute, knowing that the IoT has said that the oysters from Thailand, from Orapong's network, have now been transported safely at a sub, you know, 5-degree temperature all the way through the supply chain. So what essentially it just comes down to is, will there be cost savings for the user, and will there be increased revenue? And that's really where the COVID crisis has been an accelerant. You know, this has been, well, if you look at, say, Zoom, if you look at even Microsoft Teams, if you look, there's been many winners. And definitely, I think that digitization and decentralized ledgers are a big winner. But just to come back to your very detailed question, I would say that there are many ecosystems that are currently being disrupted. However, exactly like Chinhui said, adoption is not there yet. The tools are also not interoperable yet. But just watch, as soon as the financing arm, the money arm, so this shortfall of $3.4 trillion, if this starts coming through from digital yuan, you're going to start seeing contracts and trade settled in renminbi as opposed to on, you know, other fiat. So that's why Singapore is very well positioned. But anyone watching this this panel really needs to start considering. I mean, just as one last example, a stimulus payment, you know, instead of just being quite a crude instrument, as is happening in some of the Western countries, in some of the Asian countries, they're actually being paid in central bank digital currency. And if they don't spend it in a specific amount of time with specific stimulus intention, then it can disappear or it can reduce. And this is the power of a digital currency, as opposed to, say, you know, some of the traditional fiat currencies that we've used in the past. So I think that the main driver of ecosystem adoption is going to be simplicity, network effect, interoperability, and most importantly, the money, which is what people are needing, the finance, is going to lead. Thanks for that.
Yeah, always follow the money. That's what somebody taught me a long time ago. So that might have been Chinhui, but I think that's a very good point, Dorji. Many good points. John, MasterCard is obviously a huge global business, and is parts of ecosystems pretty much everywhere. How do you think about the DLTs on all these different network levels, global, regional, domestic?
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. And complicated question, but I think Dorji gave a pretty comprehensive answer, so I'm not sure I need to say too much. But I think so. The way that we think about it, I mean, obviously, there are specific at any given time, issues or challenges that we're trying to solve, and as we said before, the complexity in the industry is there for all to see. I mean, if we look at taking away from AP just now, if you look at the UK and the situation around our other sort of co-crisis Brexit, I mean, there's a lot of discussions around congestion ports and how goods are currently moving. And from a practical perspective, there are great practical applications of how we can use blockchain and data orchestration to resolve some of the basically outdated processes that we have today. And if we think about clearing goods into the UK today, the complexity and the cost of that is frankly too complex and too high. And we're working on with partners again, basically to get to a point where declaration should be costing pennies rather than hundreds of pounds. And so practically, again, and from a value perspective, that's a lot of our focus, and we can talk about that being relevant, particularly relevant for the UK today. But frankly, it's a global dynamic. The technology that we're leveraging and the solutions that we're bringing to bear to improve processes in the UK are as applicable in the UK as they are anywhere, and really it's around the ecosystem and standards developing so that we can achieve everything that Dorji set out. And so for us, it's very much a global dynamic, but I think there's tremendous value at every level.
Yeah, those are some great examples. And as you mentioned, the Brexit customs issue is very acute at this moment in time, but the similar issues are more chronic in anywhere where there's border crossing. There are customs frictions, and this technology is certainly applicable to all of those.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring in Orapong and Shinhui to pick up on the thread we were talking about around trade finance and decentralization of finance, and how does blockchain allow that to happen, and what is that going to look like in the near future in terms of particularly decentralization of finance and supply chains? So
maybe I can.
Or Chinhui, let's start.
Okay, maybe I can start first, and then So the currently the elephant in the room, we have used this word again, is that banks, when they said they lend against that cargo or lend against the shipment, most of the time they actually lend against balance sheet. This is the real elephant in the room. Why? Is because they are unable to track the cargo or link the cargo. Right? There have been $9 billion worth of fraud in the last 4 years, simply because the piece of documentation is being used many times. Right? And the banks finance the same piece of information many times. The banks have literally lent on documentation. The traditional banking, where you go down to check due diligence, you go down to the oil terminal, for example, go to the mine or the warehouse, has slowly changed. Why? Because like what Dorji said, the volume are just so huge, right? So it's now based on documentation, based on reputation. I lend to the tycoon, I lend to the father, and now I lend to the son. Right? How many of them seriously lend on cash flow? So with this technology, does serve a pain point, and like what Chris you just alluded to, follow the money. So if the banks or the non-bank financing firms decided that this is the way to go, the only way we start lending is to authenticate the digital token or digital ledger, right, then everybody will get their act right together. Right? You can pass the laws like Singapore is doing, and then you drastically also reduce fraud, so that the bankers can confidently come back to the system. But like what many of the speakers here who are veterans in the industry, unlike myself, this is only my just finished my year 5. The whole system needs to get it right, right? Because you can do the trade registry that 26 banks in Singapore have signed up for and upload their digital ledgers or digital LC or digital contracts. But if you do not link it to the oil terminals, link it to the shipment, right, link it to the system, right, then that piece of information is only one part of the elephant. Right, so like what Georgie said, I think it will take time to build the whole ecosystem, to build interoperationality, and that is what the task force is doing. The task force is building the information highway to link up the various parts so that the whole elephant makes sense. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent, Chin Hui. That was a very comprehensive discussion of what needs to be done in the future. And just to tie back to a comment that you made at the very beginning, all of this is based on documentation that was structured literally hundreds of years ago, between whether it's letter of credits or bills of lading. I'm not sure whether that goes back to the 1700s or the 1600s, but it's somewhere in that range for where these documents originally came from. So it's amazing we're still those things for international trade. Orapong, would love your thoughts on decentralization of finance and what that's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, I like to build on your conversation with Dorothy about follow the money. Right? If you look at today, we actually do not borrow money from bank, even though it looks like that. Right? What bank does is bank gather money through current account, saving account, right? Once have enough money, then provide that through lending to whomever need liquidity, right? That's the world as it is today. But what if you have a platform that can verify that the trade is real? You have a platform that can process all of the payment and settle all the payment. Why do you need a bank? Right? So my belief is bank in traditional role will disappear. Right? Because technology will provide authentication of trades. Technology will provide control to minimize or limit risk. Right? That's why the word distributed finance makes a lot of sense. Right? Today, if you read about distributed finance, it's about crypto asset bringing into the system and being able to pay interest and provide lending. Distributed finance in broader definition, right? It means that you don't need the middleman, you don't need the bank, right? What if the platform can provide you the confidence that the trades are real, right? Source people who have liquidity, who have excess liquidity, whether it's the buyer itself or external investors, can provide money directly to the point of need, which are the suppliers. Right? Once that happens, distributed finance will expand. That's my view. And with if you couple that with the ability to tokenize and securitize, if you look at purchase order, right? A purchase order is actually a promise to pay. Right? You can anticipate it in the next 90 days, in the next 120 days, a payment will occur. Right? It's the abstraction of the physical trade that tie to financial flow. Right? If you can tokenize that, you can tokenize purchase order, you can tokenize good receipt, you can tokenize submitted invoice, approved invoice. All of those are tradable instruments, similar to very short-term bonds. Like for example, if I tokenize invoice, right, I know that in 30 days a payment will occur. Right? Once you look at this reality, right, that very soon technology will provide confidence in the authenticating all the trades technology will control the payment such that you don't have to worry whether debt can be collected. Then distributed finance will happen. And that's where we're gearing up. Right? If you look at what I'm doing today, I'm just scattering the mass. Right? I hope that one day I have enough companies, I have enough trades. Right? But the end goal is to create a new way of banking that you don't need traditional banks.
That's great. That's a very good elucidation of distributed finance, and that was very compelling. Thank you. So I'm conscious of time. I just want to hit one last question, which was raised earlier by a number of the panelists, and that is around the issue of adoption, and in particular adoptions by SMEs. So we all know that distributed ledger and blockchain have been focus area for some of the larger companies, but how do you get the smaller companies on board as well? They've got resource constraints. They may not understand this as well. So I'd love to get some thoughts. Let's start with Dorji and John. Would love to get your thoughts on how do you bring the small and medium enterprises into the ecosystem, and how do you make it easy for them? Again, another tough question for you, Dorji.
No worries. I keep thinking about my gin and tonic that's outside. So one of the things that and I'm aware of time, so very quickly, the reason why we partnered with the ICC is because we think that SMEs, they account for 99% of the actual economy and jobs, and that's the real economy that's being hit right now. And to Orapong's point, obviously, if we can actually provide them with real finance in today's currently finance constrained world, so that's what I think will drive adoption. But we're working with the ICC because we think that the access point is going to be chambers of commerce. They're 45 million members. So it's going to be distribution platforms. The second thing is you have to just recognize that SMEs, exactly like you said, there's going to be an adoption curve. There's the early adopters, then there's the bulk, and then there's the laggards. So right now we're really trying to find who are the early adopters. So people that are already very comfortable with PayPal or Stripe are good starting points. So that's really where I'll just hand off to John. But I think that the critical tipping point for global adoption will be, can we bring the SMEs along? So obviously huge operators like Trafi and very, very competent interoperators like MasterCard are never going to have a problem. But how do you bring the real economy along, I think, is going to be the critical question. And so that's why Orapong and I will start working together starting tomorrow. And I'm very happy to bring the ICC to Orapong's platform, as long as it re-domiciles to Singapore. Right, Chin Hui?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm glad you all are focused on the SME adoption. It's absolutely critical. I would completely agree. John, your thoughts?
Just quickly, yeah, I think there is a lot of focus on SMEs, Christopher, just now. I think I see it clearly in a lot of the initiatives that we're involved in. So, I believe that adoption is not going to be an issue because of that focus, and because ultimately, if the services are the right services, adoption will come, and we see that particularly, around agriculture. Food supply chain just now in Asia Pacific and Latin America, we see a lot of traction with the SME segments and some of the initiatives we're working on. So I'm confident. I think it's really about the service.
Excellent. Any last words, Orapong and then Chin Hui, around SME adoption, perhaps?
I have onboarded more than 9,000 suppliers, right? And what we have learned is that if someone needs money, they will do whatever you say. Right? Because first, as Chin Hui said, right, bank today work on balance sheet. So bank normally don't deal with small suppliers, right? But for us, we don't care because we know whether the trades are real or not, and we know the buyers. Right? So as long as we can provide liquidity, they will come. And if you compare the rate, right, today for suppliers who are not qualified to do business with bank in Thailand, they pay about 20% interest rate for factoring. Our platform provides factoring at the rate lower than 4%. Because one, we don't need any documentation. I have all the documentation I need on my platform, right? Two, I have no bad debt. I have been providing factoring for more than 2 years. I have zero bad debt because technology control everything. And if you can provide lending at 4% rate compared to 20% market rate, right, supplier will come.
Excellent,
So-
excellent. I thought follow the money was good, but if people need the money, they'll do whatever you want. Is much better. I think that was excellent. And in all seriousness, you've certainly proven that you know if you've got the right business model, you can onboard thousands and thousands of SMEs. So great example, great example. And Chun-Hui, I think you were the first one who raised the issue of adoption and SMEs at the very beginning. So I'd like to hand over the last words.
Yeah, so
to you.
thank you thank you for giving us a chance to speak at this panel. So I just want to add on to what the three panelists have said. But we also needs to help the SME to digitalize, right? Because they are smaller, they may not have the kind of budget or the manpower help. At least my government officers, what they are planning to do is to go down to the SME to teach them how to digitalize, to handhold them for a while and teach them, right? At least in the logistics space in Singapore. At the height of the crisis, many people in Singapore and elsewhere in Thailand and anywhere else do not want to hold cash, right? And there was a push in the hawker centers here to digitalize, to use digital cash to pay for the food in the hawker center. And this comes with a lot of help, right? Because at the same time, you also can employ people who are out of job to help the hawkers to adopt a digital cash. So I think a little bit of hand-holding is needed. If you go back 20 years, right, when ATM machines are just implemented in many parts of Asia, forward-looking bank like DBS will recruit not young people, right, but older people to teach the old folks how to use ATM machine. Right. So today we're back to this stage, right? Instead of just ATM machine, it is now digitization. The concept of digitization does scare some of the SME, but as all the panelists have already pointed out, you put the money, right, and then they have no choice but to do it. So the question is for policymaker. Right, I was just chatting with my son this morning. Right, do you think for the country it is better for smaller companies to collapse? Or do you think overall it's better as long as other companies take over their place and jobs are created overall? So I think it's a policy dilemma, right? Because clearly some companies are not going to survive, not going to adopt the new changes. But I just hope that in this crisis, Singapore, Thailand, and Asia will come out stronger. And then we will be digitalized and as a bloc provide a good living for our own citizens and our residents. So I think this is the time. Right? Let's don't waste this crisis. Thank you.
That's a great way to summarize it, Chun-Hui. Let's not waste this crisis, and let's use it to leap forward. So. With that, I'd like to close the panel. We're a couple minutes over, but we had some great discussion. I want to thank all of the panelists and thank Project Ubin for allowing us the time at the Singapore FinTech Festival to share all of this with you. So thanks everyone and enjoy the rest of the conference.